The Holy Gospel according to John, the 2nd chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. 3 days later, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, was there. Jesus and his disciples had likewise been invited to the celebration. At a certain point, the wine ran out, and Jesus' mother told him, "They have no wine." Jesus replied, "Mother, what does that have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." She instructed those waiting on the tables, "Do whatever he tells you." As prescribed for Jewish ceremonial washings, there were 6 stone water jars on hand, each one holding between 15 and 25 gallons. "Fill those jars with water," Jesus said, and the servers filled them to the brim. "Now," Jesus said, "draw some out and take it to the caterer." They did as they were instructed. The caterer tasted the water, which had been turned into wine, without knowing where it had come from. The only ones who knew were those who were waiting on the tables, since they had drawn the water. The caterer then called the bride and groom over and remarked, "People usually serve the best wine first. Then, when the guests have been drinking a while, a lesser vintage is served. What you've done is to keep the best wine until now." Jesus performed this first of his signs at Cana in Galilee. In this way, he revealed his glory, and the disciples believed in him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Grace, mercy, and peace to you from the triune God, the one who was, who is, and who is to come. Amen. A few years ago, I was attending an Easter morning worship service, and the pastor was giving a children's message about Jesus' resurrection, about how on Friday Jesus had died, and now on Sunday Jesus was not dead, he was alive. And at this point, while the pastor was talking, there was a little kiddo who was maybe 3 or 4 who started to fidget. He seemed to be bothered by something, and he started shaking his head. He was looking around, and then he said loudly, "It doesn't make sense." The pastor ignored him and kept on talking. He said again, "It doesn't make sense." And I was helping to lead the service, so I'm sitting in the front row of the church. I'm maybe 5 feet away from this kiddo. And then he turns and he looks directly at me and he says, "It doesn't make sense." And my heart broke for him because his comments weren't being addressed. He wasn't being acknowledged. And do you know what? He's right. It doesn't make sense. So I've been thinking a lot this week about that sweet, courageous little kiddo, because this surprising sign at the wedding at Cana is also something that doesn't make sense. Our story today only gives us some of the bare bones of the situation. We know when, on the 3rd day. We know where, in Cana of Galilee. We know who was there, Mary and Jesus and his disciples, and we know what was going on. It was a wedding, a feast. But we don't really get much insight beyond that. Why was Jesus' mother there? Who even invited Jesus and his disciples in the first place? And our gospel writer, John, is reminding us that all of these wonderings and all of this speculation about what might be beyond these details actually draws us away from the core of this story, which is the miraculous transformation of water into wine. This miracle, this sign, is flooded in mystery. We hear about the moments before the transformation, and we hear about the moments after the transformation of water to wine, but not about the precise moment when the miracle occurs. Now, for us as contemporary readers and listeners who live in a very rational and scientifically oriented post-Enlightenment age, we may find this miracle puzzling, or at best, or maybe embarrassing or offensive at worst. Because this miracle challenges our assumptions and our understandings about order and about control, about what's possible, about where God is found, and about how God is known. And I think if we're unwilling to wrestle with these wonderings, to sit in the unknown, to entertain these questions, then the impact of the miracle is lost. The very force of this miracle is drawn precisely from its extraordinariness, from the dissonance that it creates. It's really tempting for me to try to talk around the miracle, to focus on other aspects of the story, or even maybe to try to explain away the miracle, focusing on the difference between our worldview now and the worldview of our biblical context. But I'm going to try to resist that temptation, because those types of interpretations domesticate the miracle and make it adhere to our own rules and definitions, whether those rules are of science or of faith or of something else. I am inspired by that courageous 3-year-old who said it doesn't make sense. So I will resist the urge to get caught up in an explanation or maybe even an apology, because the essence of any miracle is that it shatters our conventional expectations and explanations. And this miracle at the wedding in Cana is no exception. We shouldn't diminish the extraordinariness of this story. We need to struggle with what this miracle says about Jesus. And the miracle itself begins with a description of the water jars. This is the first time in the Gospel of John where the author is providing really extensive detail, describing the number of jars, their composition, their purpose, their size. And everything about this description is overdrawn, from the description of the jars themselves to the amount of space in the story that is even dedicated to this description, which is perhaps a way to mirror and emphasize the extravagance of the miracle that is about to take place. These 6 stone jars stood empty, waiting to be filled. So the stewards filled the jars to the brim with water. And since each jar had a large capacity between 15 and 25 gallons, Jesus turned quite an astonishing amount of water into wine. He works an unprecedented act, transforming many gallons of water into wine. It's a miracle of abundance, of extravagance, of transformation, of new possibilities. And the grace that this miracle offers and the glimpse of Jesus' glory that it provides run outside of our conventional expectations and place us at odds with how we think the world is to be ordered, or how we understand the world to be ordered. The caterer says people usually serve the best wine first, and then when the guests have been drinking a while, a lesser vintage is served. What you've done is keep the best wine until now. The caterer is so surprised by the sight and the smells of this sign that he cannot see beyond the surface. He summons the bride and groom, the hosts of this party, because he assumes that the wine can be explained by his own reasoning. He attributes the wine to the unprecedented hospitality of this couple. But this miracle cannot be explained by just some irregularity in wedding etiquette. Rational explanations miss the mark, and this miracle simply doesn't make sense. Jesus' disciples, on the other hand, recognize that this miraculous abundance of wine is a sign of God's presence among them. They recognize the revelation of God in the abundance of something new in these stone jars. And they recognize Jesus as the one who brought God to them. And through this story, we are invited to see what the disciples see, a glimpse of the identity and the character of God through this superabundance and the gracious gift of Jesus. The miracle of water changing to wine shatters the boundaries of the disciples' conventional world. And it's the disciples who are willing to entertain the possibility that this boundary breaking marks the inbreaking of God. In the book of Exodus, the inbreaking of God involves both a sort of manifestation of God's power and a glimpse into the visible radiance of God. In our other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the revelation of God's glory is embodied in Jesus through the story of Jesus' transfiguration. But in the Gospel of John, which we read from today, there is no transfiguration story. God's glory is continually manifested in Jesus' life and in his ministry, in extraordinary acts, in ordinary situations, and marvelous miracles in mundane moments. So here we are at the beginning of Jesus' life and ministry, drinking in his first sign. That doesn't happen with angels singing or bright lights glowing around Jesus, but in the midst of the community, in the midst of Jesus' own people at a wedding banquet. This miracle is the inaugural event of Jesus' ministry, a vivid reenactment of the gift that Jesus has to offer, which will culminate in his death and his resurrection and his ascension, which are more moments like this sign at the wedding at Cana that make absolutely no sense, at least to me. So today I am choosing to simply rest in the mystery of the miracle at Cana, to wrestle with the voices inside that tell me it doesn't make sense, to sit in the wonder, to sit in the awe of the ways in which God is able to do extraordinary things in the most ordinary of moments, and to trust and believe and hold on to hope that God is still doing extraordinary things in me, in you, in our loved ones, and in all of our midst. Amen.